Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is, what kind of monster stabs a bubby in the back? What kind of teenager stabs an 86-year-old woman in the back 3 times? And what kind of person has a friend who stabs a different 82-year-old woman multiple times in the back? And then they both run away. The answer is simple. They are Palestinian Arab teenage terrorists who want to instill fear in the hearts of innocent, defenseless people. These are terrorists. They're not the average teenage thugs. It takes a particular type of person to approach a cluster of 5 80-plus-year-old bubbas, taking a mid-morning constitutional in broad daylight and stab 2 of them in the back over and over again. These kinds of kids cannot distinguish between targets and values. It seems that they're not alone. Neither can the society in which they live. The value attached to attacking the elderly should be very low on the ladder of machismo achievements. The entire scenario should invoke disgust. Disgust that these teenagers are terrorists, and disgust that these teenage terrorists are attacking defenseless elderly people. Palestinian leaders, teachers, parents, clerics, even terrorist leaders should shun this attack. But that's not what happened. It's not what happens in the Palestinian world. Palestinian youth have been indoctrinated to strike, to kill, to stab, and to run. The messages are all over the internet. So when these Palestinian Arab teenagers attacked a group of Jewish Israelis, albeit old and defenseless Jewish Israelis, in their warped teenage eyes, they scored a great victory, and they got away with it too. Although 2 people were subsequently arrested immediately afterwards, they were quickly released. And in the eyes of their contemporaries and cohorts, they are heroes. The terror attack took place mid-morning on the Haz Promenade in Jerusalem. The promenade is a picturesque, beautiful walking area that allows one to take in the glorious views of both the modern city of Jerusalem and the old city of Jerusalem, as well as the hills of the Judean desert. The land it sits on is probably the very site described in Genesis 22, when after 3 days of travels, Abraham looked up and saw Moriah, the place where he would bind his son Isaac as a sacrifice in the famous story known as the Akedah. Beauty abounds. History resonates. The ice cream truck on the upper level sounds its chimes. Arabs and Jews walk, jog, ride their bikes along the paths of the promenade. There are often public concerts in the well-designed shady spaces and amphitheaters along the paths. There is a wondrous echo chamber where one can call out and hear a series of echoes bouncing back and forth from the various hillsides and mountains of Jerusalem. The name of the JNF, the Jewish National Fund forest below the promenade, is called the Peace Forest. How far have we come? How sad should we be? How ironic. At the heart of the matter of this particular attack is a single message. All terror is horrific and deplorable, but some terror is worse than others. Planning and signaling out children is the worst, or so I thought until now, where we have a plot to murder bubbas, Jewish grandmothers in their 80s. This act is horribly reminiscent and reverberates with as much evil as the murder of Leon Klinghoffer. To refresh your memory, Klinghoffer was murdered when Palestinian terrorists took the wheelchair-bound elderly man, Jewish man, and threw him off the Achille Lauro, the cruise ship they had hijacked. In this case, the case of the 2 elderly women, there has been no word of condemnation by Palestinian leaders. Arab leaders around the world have said nothing, and certainly the United Nations has been silent. Where is the revulsion against these heinous acts of violence? 2 Palestinian teenagers are showing the world that any Jew and every Jew is a target. Their method of attack was not like a bomb attack, when whoever is nearby is hit, and may include the elderly or the young, by simple virtue of happenstance. The objective of all terrorists is to frighten. In that, this attack was very successful, but it also showed the sheer inhumanity of the attackers and their sponsors and mentors. There could be no justification for attacking elderly women from behind and stabbing them in the back. One would hope that parents and children within the Palestinian world, as well as their supporters, are asking themselves, their families, and their students, if this terror attack went too far. I've heard a few murmurs to that effect, but nothing more, certainly no proclamations of condemnation. Both elderly women are expected to recover. One was in intensive care, and their wounds were being treated. The second victim is in a heart surgery unit. She was there because the stabbing affected her pre-existing condition. That should not be a surprise. People in their 80s often have heart conditions. What is astounding is that none of the 5 elderly women present during the attack, all potential victims, suffered a heart attack during the terrorist attack or as they waited for medical help to arrive. My hope is that a lesson can be learned, that clear-minded people will see these terrorists for what they are. They will realize that their actions cannot be justified. And yet, I fear that instead this will be another example of how the poor Palestinian has no other option but to attack because of the evil, oppressive Israelis. How 5 Israeli bubbas in their 80s became evil oppressors that needed to be murdered is a mystery to me. Israel's Independence Day is the 5th day of the Hebrew month of Iyar. In 1948, that corresponded to the 15th of May. The Palestinians commemorated Israel's 1948 creation in what they called the catastrophe, or the Nakba in Arabic. It's a yearly tradition. They mourned the creation of the State of Israel, which took place 68 years ago. In Palestinian eyes, Israel's creation was their destruction. In Palestinian cities and villages throughout the West Bank, a siren rang for 68 seconds, 1 second for every year of Israel. Palestinians stood silent, mourning, and mimicking the siren that Israel sounds during Holocaust Memorial Day, and for the day that memorializes Israel's fallen soldiers, their heroes, and the victims of terror. They created a model train out of cardboard, put it on wheels, and had it run from Dehesha, a refugee camp just south of Bethlehem, to Rachel's tomb in northern Bethlehem. It was an effective use of a near life-size model train, which they called the Train of Return. Only 1 or 2 people were on the train, but they used large model keys symbolizing the keys to their family homes that they still hang on to and hand down to younger generations. The idea is to use the keys to return home. Of course, there were also riots. The creation of Israel displaced many people, including millions of Jews across the Arab world, who had to escape the Arab world and run to Israel for refuge. Palestinians tell just part of the story. Yes, Arabs living in Israel left their homes, but one of the major forces telling them to leave was Arab leadership, which told them to clear out while they destroyed the Jews and forced them into the sea. The most perplexing part of the Nakba is that it places all the blame on Israel. It does not consider the Arab role. Israel won the war. That was not part of their consideration at the time. That was a tragedy. The other tragedy is the incongruity this day bemoans the creation of Israel in 1948. It does not focus on the territories. Dahesha, Bethlehem, the entire West Bank were part of Jordan after 1948, all the way up until 1967. Palestinian sadness is real, but Israel is only partially responsible. Only after they realize this will there be a possibility of living together. Otherwise, Palestinians will continue to wish for and work for the disappearance and destruction of Israel. And that's not going to happen. As we know, Muslim terror and stabbing are not just in Israel. In Germany, a terrorist shouted, "Allahu Akbar," Allah is great, in Arabic, as he stabbed 4 people on a train platform 20 miles east of Munich in Germany. One of those stabbed died from his wounds. It all took place just before 5 a.m. as people were commuting to work early one morning. It's hard not to call this Islamic terror, and yet people are calling the terrorist crazy or psychotic or deranged. They say he was talking drivel when the police apprehended him. People are making excuses for this act of terror. Europeans are looking for reasons. Was this man brainwashed, encouraged by radical Islamic groups? Was he a member? They'll search his computer and see if he was part of the now infamous loosely linked cyber community that supports ISIS, a community you do not join or sign up for. All you do is click, watch, read, write about radical Islam. It doesn't matter if the terrorist was officially part of an established organization. The current high-tech world of ISIS stimulates lone wolves and very small units to act on their own. If he was just a kook, he would not have been shouting, "Allah is great," and stabbing people. People who stab other people and shout, "Allahu Akbar," are Muslim terrorists. Period. End. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. I'm taking two columns from opposite worlds today. It will be an interesting study. The first column is from Arutz Sheva, and the second is from Al Jazeera. You cannot get more different than these two media points of view. First up is a column that was published on Arutz Sheva on Monday, May 16th, 2016. It's by Dr. Alex Grubman. Arutz Sheva is a religious Zionist media platform. It identifies with the settler movement and is considered mainstream right of center. This piece is called "The Media as the Weapon in the Israeli-Arab War," and then is subtitled, "The West Adopted Communist Semantics in Discussing the Conflict as the Soviets Hoped and Planned They Would." Grubman is a historian trained at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem with a master's and PhD. Grubman has worked at the Wiesenthal Center. He was the executive director of the American-Israel Friendship League. He writes in this essay that the West just does not understand because they swallow the Arab propaganda material hook, line, and sinker. He also suggests that the media issue is a war as important as any other defense and attack mission Israel needs to approach. He writes, "Israel is engaged in the war in which the media plays a fundamental role in influencing world public opinion and government attitudes and decisions." Grubman further explains that information is the chief weapon today. It is so obvious, but then again, Israel is also preoccupied with their military defense. He continues, "It's now fundamentally an information fight, and it is on this information battlefield," Steve Fandacaro, an American military expert, believes, "that the struggle between the Western democracy and Islamic fundamentalism will eventually be determined. The new element of power that has emerged in the last 30 to 40 years and has subsumed. The rest is information." He said, "A revolution happened without us knowing or paying attention. Perception truly now is reality, and our enemies know it." Grubman quotes the legendary Arabist Bernard Lewis. Lewis suggests that the Six-Day War caused a major change in the West's understanding. Quote, "The strategy of branding Israel as the antagonist did not take long. Soon after the end of the Six-Day War, Bernard Lewis, a professor of Near Eastern Studies, observed, the vocabulary of Middle Eastern politics has been enriched with a new formula, the removal of the consequences of aggression. The Arab states identified Israel as the aggressor and demanded restoration of Arab lands and the return of their Arab populations. Under certain circumstances, Lewis said, Israel might relinquish her conquests. It is even possible that the Arabs might return, though this would make them unique among the countless millions in Europe, Asia, and Africa who have fled or been driven from their homes in our brutal century. But far more has happened than the occupation of lands and the movement of peoples. Important as these may be, in the world of reality, events cannot be unmade, and their effects persist even when their results vanish." Indeed, Grubman develops a very important theme to explain the issue. Israel was David, who became Goliath, and now Israel and the Western world have a difficult time with the new reality of a strong Israel. Grubman concludes, saying, These criticisms ultimately obscure the distinctions between what is right and wrong and undermines the foundations of Judeo-Christian morality. After nearly 3 decades, the cumulative effects of the Soviet campaign to defame Zionism and the more recent attempts to turn the clock back at Durban have created an environment of moral confusion which has made terror and violence acceptable and justifiable. The resulting condition known as anomie, literally lawlessness in Greek, signifies a social condition in which the hierarchy of values disintegrates and all regulation is lacking. Second up is a column from Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is a media platform. It was launched in 1999. It is a television network in Arabic and in English, as well as a website in Arabic and in English. It is one of the most read and most popular TV and websites in the entire world, not only in the Arabic world. The network was created by a Qatari sheikh in the oil-rich country as an alternative to the state-run news spewed by dictatorships in the Middle East. He was correct. It became a huge hit. Al Jazeera means the peninsula in Arabic. Its motto is the opinion and the other opinion. This piece is by James Barr. He works and lives in Paris and is a native of England and a graduate of Oxford. He writes about the Middle East. James Barr is the author of A Line in the Sand, Britain, France, and the Struggle That Shaped the Middle East. This piece is called Sykes-Picot is Not to Blame for Middle East's Problems. The subtitle is Sykes-Picot is a symptom of the Middle East's fundamental problem, not its cause. Sykes-Picot is a treaty between England and France that divided up the Middle East. They were carving it up to meet their needs and not the needs of the people who lived there. Barr wrote this because the 100th anniversary of Sykes-Picot is this year. This is how he begins. The Sykes-Picot Agreement turns 100 this week. Named after its negotiators, Sir Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot, the secret wartime deal proposed dividing the Middle East between Britain and France down an extraordinary line. To quote Sykes verbatim, it ran from the E in Acre to the last K in Kirkuk. And its vestiges are still visible today in Syria's border with Jordan and western Iraq. Sykes would surely have been astonished to know that a century later we are still discussing his deal with Picot, for he had originally proposed the agreement in December of 1915 as an expedient to avert a row. The French were angry because they had discovered that behind their backs, their British allies had offered the Arab territory they wanted themselves. That put their creaky wartime alliance with Britain under added strain. Barr continues his essay and shows that the treaty was a symbol of Western colonialism then and now. This is what he writes. ISIL played on the border's symbolism 2 years ago when they, having seized Mosul, it released a triumphal video declaring the end of Sykes-Picot. This showed the bulldozer carving through the sandbank that delineated the Syrian-Iraq border. Barr concludes by saying that Sykes-Picot was a problem, but not the cause. This is what he writes. This region, and Syria in particular, has for millennia served as an arena for great power rivalry, of which Sykes-Picot was just a recent example. While the infamous agreement certainly aggravated the region's instability, it is not the underlying cause. I think that he's correct. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. All the cartoons today are from the Iranian International Cartoon Exhibit on the Holocaust. The exhibit was open from May 14th to May 30th, 2016. 50 artists exhibit 850 cartoons. The leadership of the exhibit and the president, as well as the foreign minister of Iran, have all said that there is no connection between the government and the exhibit. I highly doubt that, especially because the foundation that sponsors the exhibit is sponsored by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is a very political and extremely conservative influence in Iran. The motivation behind the exhibit is actually very, very troubling. The organizers were searching to hurt the very souls of the West as deeply as possible. They were responding to the pain they felt from Western political cartoons depicting and making fun of Muhammad. In their minds, the equivalent idea, most holy in the psyche of the West, was the Holocaust. So they picked at that. How little they understand us. This year's award, by the way, for Best Cartoon is $50,000, up from last year's $25,000. This first cartoon I want to show uses the famous Arbeit macht frei, and it sets the image. But the image is, work will set you free. That's what the Nazis put on the death camps. Only the gates here of the camp have stars of David in them. And it is being guarded by an Israeli soldier. Inside the gates is the Mosque of Al-Aqsa, the mosque in Jerusalem. The idea behind the cartoon is that Israel has become Nazis. This is a recurring theme in many of the cartoons. This next cartoon is of a kite flying up to the sky. The kite is a Palestinian flag. It's being flown from low down, and the white in the sky is very difficult to get to. It's dark. The buildings are dark. They're so tall, but the buildings are in the shape of a swastika. The symbol here, and the point is that Israel is the Nazi force not allowing freedom and the Palestinians to yearn for their freedom and, of course, to reach the sky. This last cartoon is very simple also. The Palestinian is in stocks, which is a book on the Holocaust. The message is that the writing and the story and the history of the Holocaust has imprisoned the Palestinians. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. An ex-Syrian brigadier general named Nabil al-Dandal recently sent a letter to Yuli Edelstein, the Speaker of the Israeli Knesset. Al-Dandal said that Syrians want and need peace with Israel. They want it now more than ever. The letter was sent through academic researchers, through intermediaries. In a phone interview with Ynet, a leading internet source for news in Israel, Al-Dandal said, and I'm quoting him, "When I was part of the regime, I was convinced that former President Hafez al-Assad missed an opportunity to make peace, like former Egyptian President Anwar al-Sadat. But when you serve the regime, you need to say what it wants you to say and not what you really think." Al-Dandal expressed his frustration that Israel has not supported the Syrian resistance against Assad. He said, "Israel has an opportunity to make peace with Syrian people, who now, since the revolution against al-Assad, have made sense of many things, including the lie that the regime is selling regarding its resistance to Israel." Al-Dandal also said that the Syrian people want to emphasize to the Israeli people that it wants to separate itself from wars and that it is ready to take the necessary steps to build the infrastructure for religious coexistence in the homeland of Moses and Jesus. This is very important. It shows a real opening in the dialogue between Israelis and Syrians. It shows potential. Al-Dandal, who says he's not just one man, one voice, but rather the voice of many people, is bemoaning the fact that there is no diplomatic movement to normalize relations with Syria as there was with Egypt. And he is hoping that the normalization can still be brought into play. Tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia got worse. Of course, like always, it's all about the Sunni-Shiite conflict. In this latest chapter of the conflict, Iranians will not be able to attend the Hajj in January. Iran blames Saudi Arabia for not being able to work out the details so that, like all religious Muslims, Iranians and their pilgrims can make the religious trek to Mecca. Last year, during the Hajj, over 2,000 people were trampled to death. 464 of those dead were Iranian. Also this year, Saudi Arabia cut off diplomatic relations with Iran. It happened in January after Iran burned and attacked the Saudi embassy in Tehran, after Saudis executed the Shiite religious leader. These tensions make normalization very difficult. The two states are not allies. They are rivals for leadership of the Islamic world. There is no way to make their interaction less contentious. It all goes to prove, once again, that the internal conflicts in the Middle East are rooted in divisions that have nothing to do with Israel. And these tensions are not likely to be resolved. Back to Israel. They struck oil in Israel recently. You know, black gold, Texas tea, oil, not gas. Gas has been in the news a lot lately, mostly due to the huge reserves discovered and now being tapped in the Mediterranean Sea. But now we're talking about oil. A group of companies have partnered together in order to pump the newfound oil. The oil was found near the Dead Sea in a place called Khartoumim. It was discovered by the same group that first discovered it in Halamish in 1995. It's not very far from one another. Ever since 1995, there was believed to be a small, significant oil reserve there. At the time, the low price of oil helped the owners and investors make the decision not to drill. But now, despite the low price of oil, things might be different. This is very big news. It will not make Israel a large oil producer like Saudi Arabia or even an exporter, but it will put her on the map of oil-producing countries. Now, from the practical to the absurd. Imagine you're a mathematician doing a complicated differential equation while sitting on a plane. You scribble away, and your seatmate thinks you're writing in Arabic and plotting a terror attack. Well, that is exactly what happened on an American Airlines flight from Philadelphia to Syracuse recently. The person doing the math was a world-renowned math professor from the University of Pennsylvania who was on his way to give a lecture on math. His name was Guido Mencio, and he is originally from Italy. Was he surprised? The humor cannot be lost. The person who reported the math attack asked to get off the plane, claiming she was feeling ill. But once she deplaned, she said the real reason was her seatmate's scribbles. What is shocking is that the entire non-incident could not be dealt with quickly and dismissed. Instead, the flight was delayed for 2 hours. This is a no-brainer. Actually, all you need to do is use your brain, and you would know that this was not terror. It wasn't a threat. It was a differential equation. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the word Holocaust actually comes from the Hebrew olah? And olah is a burnt offering, totally consumed by fire. So the word goes from the Hebrew into the Greek, holocaustos, and makes its way into English. Olah, halo, you get it? The word exists and has existed in English for centuries. But when we refer to the Nazi murder of the Jews of Europe, it's always spelled with a capital H. Several words at first were used to describe what we now universally call the Holocaust or Shoah. At first it was called catastrophe, the catastrophe. It was also called the destruction. That's what Raoul Hilberg called it in his monumental work. In Hebrew, at first it was called the Chorban, or the destruction. Also in Yiddish it was called that, as in the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem. But that word was seriously limited to a place and a single time and connected to Jerusalem itself. But Shoah was a word from the Bible, from Proverbs chapter 1. It was clear that this was the best word to describe it in Hebrew. And Holocaust, from the Hebrew into the Greek, of a sacrifice that was totally consumed by fire, also appropriately described this horrific period in history. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.